I'm ready.
I'm going to be that guy and stop us for a second. I'm going to text my neighbor because his car is on the street and street cleaning is about to come.
Oof. Yes.
That's important.
I'm
Very neighborly
another
of you.
sip here. Yeah.
Very kind. Very kind. Excuse me. You want to fix our branding? I'm just kidding.
I get that question a lot.
Pretty.
All right, we're going to take a little break here. I want to tell you about something pretty amazing that we stumbled upon. A little ways back, we interviewed this amazing dude, Kwame Bowen, and he shared with me after the episode that his mother is a poet. And what's awesome about that is that he has all of her writings and all her poems, but what he doesn't have is her reading them. That inspired Keith and I to then start recording videos for our daughters.
And as we started recording those videos, we started running into the challenges of where are we going to send them to our daughters? How are we going to get them to them? Where are we going to save them? Is it going to be Google Drive? Is it going to be OneDrive? And then along came GiftPod. It's an audio memory that you can record and give as a private podcast. What they're going to do is edit, add music, and produce the audio that you provide them into a professional podcast that you can share with your family members for any purpose. We use it for our daughters in the future.
All right, so check it out. In the write-up for this podcast, you're going to see a link to GiftPod. If you use promo code MIC10, you're going to get a discount. And leave some amazing memories for your friends, family, loved ones, maybe for yourself. Why don't you time capsule this for yourself? I don't know.
So check them out.
Giveagiftpod.com.
MIC10 promo.
Hey, Michelle. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, guys. I'm really excited to be here.
Welcome.
I'm very excited
Great
to have you here. So we've talked to a lot of people on our podcast. I think we're over 120 people now, 112 episodes as of this recording. We've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, people who definitely have found a path on their own or exploring one or whatever the case. And one of the most consistent through lines in any person who is willing to take that leap is support from their family. Now, you take that a step further. And we've talked a lot about representation as well. Your great-grandmother, your grandmother, your mother, your sister, yourself, coming straight out of college, have all started their own businesses. Being a person who's now 38, starting his own business in an effort to demonstrate to my kids that there is a different way. What was the effect of having that lineage? Like, this is generational, especially from a female in your family, not just dad. What was that like on you growing up? What was that experience, and what type of impact did that have on you?
Yeah, it wasn't as overt or obvious. I think I kind of take it for granted, like you said, is I actually, growing up, my parents did like a flip-flop. My dad worked a corporate job doing marketing. My mom was stay-at-home mom, and then she picked up her side hobby of interior design, and a friend told her, hey, I would pay you to come do my house. And then she learned boots on the ground. And so then they did a total flip-flop around middle school age for me. And my mom runs the company, and my dad now works with my mom. So that was her entrepreneurship story. And I remember going to work with mom at age 12, 13, 14 years old, when she bought her first red Volvo convertible with the money she'd made from interior design. And it was wake up in the morning, go do a workout, go meet some clients, head over to Home Goods, do some emails, and then come back at the end of the day and kind of debrief your day and get ready for the next one. And so for me, that was working. That was my ideation at like 12, 13 years old of like, oh, this is what it means to work. Like, you can go get a manicure in the middle of the day. Like, so long as you get your work done, like that, you can have whatever lifestyle you want. And so it never really was ingrained in me, the idea of like going to an office and like doing the corporate 9 to 5 shtick, because that just wasn't my example. And my parents were flipping houses together for a while. So that was kind of my mom's story. My aunt is a veterinarian. My grandmother was a laser and aesthetics nurse after being an emergency room nurse for like decades. And then my great grandmother also was an interior designer. But there was enough of this like gap between my mother and her grandmother that they kind of learned from each other, but the world was so different in their 60-year, 70-year age gap that it really kind of, we've all kind of found our own way independently. My sister's now a wedding planner. So we all kind of went in our different lanes, but they weirdly connect.
Is there an active encouragement towards going toward an entrepreneurial route, or is it just osmosis?
I want to say osmosis, but I think my parents were really smart in parenting us to prioritize lifestyle. Like prioritize the kind of life you want to live and then find the work that supports the life that you want and not the other way around. I think that like they are big fans of family vacations and spending time outside and exercising and family time. And all of those were very prioritized in our upbringing. And so was philanthropy and giving back and finding ways to help people. That was very encouraged. But we were entrepreneurial, all of us, from like a very young age. Like I was always crafting and selling things to my friends. And they taught us even at a young age, like how to budget. My mom was giving us like clothing allowance at age 10 to say, hey, you got to figure out how to buy your school supplies, your backpack, your socks, your shoes, and the clothes you want. So if you want to blow it all on your $120 Roxy backpack, that's on you. But you're not going to have clean socks for the new school year. So it was really cool. I think my parents were really creative in that way. And they wanted to give us a lot of autonomy really young. So I think that lends itself towards entrepreneurship.
How did they prioritize lifestyle? So you said vacations and you said all these things. Did they actively talk about it, or was it just this is what you did, so this is how you saw it?
I think the latter. It was kind of a work hard, play hard. But if it weren't for my mom actively planning our vacations, like we would have never gone on them. It's not really my dad's personality to go plan a beautiful vacation somewhere. Yep. But my mom would be on vacation planning the next vacation. She's like, oh, next time, let's go here. Let's do this. And I'm very much that way. My mom and I on every personality test rank exactly the same, which is so funny. But yeah, I think family time too. I'm one of 5 girls in my family, so we're 7 altogether, and four dogs now. So we have a lot of fun. There's a lot going on.
That is interesting. The vacation thing, I get your dad on that. I love vacations, but planning them. Yeah. I've gotten to the point where it's like I'm good at setting the time aside because I'm a bit of a workaholic, but I can set the time aside now. But planning them, I'm not real strong yet.
There's
I honor that.
There's this fascinating component of your lived experience and what I'm hearing, that it doesn't always have to be talked about, but that example of just seeing it and being it without having a counter narrative thrown at you because you want to go a certain way. And so many people who want to be entrepreneurs don't necessarily have that as even one example, let alone a generational example. So it ends up having to be a conversation of support. And there is a big struggle. But for you, like you started your own business right out of college. Was that even a question for you?
I went to college thinking I wanted to be a museum curator. I loved art history. I loved fine arts. I didn't really classify myself as an artist. I wasn't that like tortured soul that had to communicate myself through art. So I felt kind of disassociated from my fellow like art students in the art department who like had these super traumatic stories and were making this really impactful personal art. I had a very great upbringing, and so I didn't feel like I was going to use that as my voice and my art in that way, and so I kind of felt disassociated from that artist stereotype. Also, I walked in as like the blonde sorority girl in the art department, and they're like, "Oh, are you lost?" because I did not fit that narrative. But I wanted,
stereotypes.
yeah, and I really wanted to study business also. But the way my university was organized is it was the School of Business and then it was School of Arts and Sciences, and you could not really cross-pollinate those classes. So I ended up going into the art department, but then was hosting things like speaker series and studio visits, and I wanted to host events and pull in artists and have lectures, and I just was too bored really with just the curriculum as is, that I was just asking the department, like, can I do this? And they're like, yeah, sure. So I ended up making the logo for the art department. Was one of my very first logos I ever made, because I was looking at it and I said, we need to post on social media. Nobody knows we're in the basement building. It's like, no one even knows we're down here. Like, no one knows, no one else on campus knows about us. And that was my whole soapbox. So I really thought I wanted to be a curator. I got an internship at a museum. It was lovely, but I was upstairs at a desk and I was working with outdated computer programs. I was not near the art. I was not near the artists. And that was like, bing, this is not what I want to do. So I had a jailbroken version of Illustrator on my laptop that I got from a friend and started making posters for people and cool graphics. And so trying to emulate things I saw on social media. And at the time, the only other job I had was babysitting, and I was making $12 an hour. And my mom, as a business owner, was referring me to friends. And I said, I don't know what to charge. And she says, charge more than you do babysitting. And so I started at $15 an hour for an entire year. And that was at age 20. So I started between my junior and senior year of college. And that was kind of how my business started. And then so 7 years since.
Nobody knows we're here. You created the logo for the art department, even though you weren't one of the artists. This definitely informs what you do now. But you said your dad's in marketing and your mom was interior design.
Yeah, so my dad worked for a software company for decades, and he was helping with the marketing side of things. He managed a team. My mom is a child development major, which I think is where she gets a lot of her great parenting stuff from, and kind of did interior design as a hobby, like did it for fun. We got to change our room every 2 years growing up to totally different, like out of the box themes. And yeah, that's kind of their background. But when I was going to college, and all my sisters now too, they're like, study what interests you and the rest will kind of fall into place. It was never like, you have to be a lawyer, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a scientist. Like, we never had that kind of pressure. And I'm so grateful for that, because we've all kind of found our way in different directions.
I think there's
real quick on the parents, does it seem, in my head, and this may be way off, it seems like those two things there's pieces of them in what you do today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
I think there's such an example that a lot of parents or people in general don't realize the effect, especially parents don't realize the effect that they have on their kids. The 9 to 5, come home, be unhappy is something you observe, right? You observe it, you see it. It's like, I'm going to have to do that too. And that's what that's what you get into. And it becomes this loop. And then we all end up having this conversation, pursue a passion, do these things. But the example that you have is a couple of things that I think a lot of entrepreneurs who are doing it like ourselves struggle with for the first time. First of all, it's your parents exercise the things that they cared about without putting the pressure of earnings on it. Like, changing your room every 2 years. Your mom gets to just have fun with that and make it a game without the pressure of making money. The second thing that you learned is asking for money. Biggest entrepreneurial roadblock. Like, it is the hardest thing to do is ask for money for something that you create. Right? Like, my stepfather, love him, is an artist, and he's an amazing artist. He still struggles to ask, like, to collect money for the things that you make. It's easy to collect a paycheck because that's something someone else is giving you for a job done.
Sure.
But it's not your own thing. And you got that example like super early. And it's not even a thing, I imagine, for you. Like, the idea is like, oh, I created this, like, pay me. Thank you. Have a nice day. Right? Like, that is an awesome example to receive. And I just think representation's a thing, like, especially that it was your mom, it wasn't just your dad, being able to build that. I think I don't have a
Well,
question in that. It's just something I thought is a really cool observation.
Representation plus example. I mean, you're talking about parenting and the way they raised you to budget and to understand the making choices. It wasn't so much a lecture. It was more of like, here's the example and you get to try it. And the power of example. I think, Keith, even you said it earlier. You're like, oh, you were just around it. And it seems like that's far more powerful than somebody saying, well, you need to go do this.
So yes, that actually does lead me to a question: is your mom going from stay-at-home mom? There's a journey many moms struggle with. Stay-at-home mom to billable hours. Yeah, I imagine that wasn't hard for her.
I think her whole life, she just wanted to be a mom. Like that was she went to college. She wanted to be a mom. She was like a teenager. She's like already wanted to be a mom. And I mean, there's 5 of us. So like, clearly she enjoyed it. So she really, really liked that. But I think she also liked her own autonomy too. So she would, even before she started her business, she would have a babysitter come Tuesdays and Thursdays for 5 or 6 hours just so she could go do her mom stuff and like go to the grocery store, go drop off the dry cleaning, like be able to go run errands and not have like 5 little people grabbing at her. And she used to get shit from other moms. Like, I can't believe you're a stay-at-home mom and you're getting a nanny. And she's like, yeah. Like, I need a break, So that was always something that she did really early on, or she would go to the gym every day and we would go in the gym childcare. I still remember this, like being in the gym childcare at like age 10, 11 and being dropped off like in the summertime and sitting there. And my mom would just take her time, do her workout, come in, do full hair dry, full makeup, get fully dressed, and then take us and leave. But that she had like 3-4 hours to herself. And she made that a priority. And I think that that's something too that, I mean, other moms that I know don't always do that. And I think that there's some jealousy there. But it takes prioritization and it takes intention to be like, no, this is my time and you guys can wait. Well, and then it makes her a better mom, This
plays into another thing that I see from my wife and some other moms that I know closely, self-care, like that idea of you first. And actually not you first to be selfish, but you first actually will make everybody else better because you're going to be coming from a healthy, happy place. So that's awesome. I just took notes.
Yeah, it's the idea of you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're going to be running on empty, you can't help anyone be better.
We have a video series called The Empty Cup based on not being able to pour from an empty cup.
Love it.
Side note. Yeah.
Branding.
Yeah, branding. So this total change of topic on mom shaming and nanny, like the nanny shaming idea.
Yeah.
Part of it is a guilt, right? It is a guilt of I need to be there for my kids, providing that, right? And I totally have compassion for that because my wife experiences that too, but she works full time. So there is a curiosity I have having 5 of you, right? And I don't know if you all have talked about the experience as 5 children that you all had having a nanny 2 days a week, getting dropped off at daycare while your mom goes and does all these things. How did your mom maintain a positive environment for the 5 of you, so there wasn't a negative impact, or was there a negative impact for any one of you?
I mean, I don't find that there was a negative impact at all. I think, again, it set the standard that like you take care of yourself first and then you can take care of everyone else. But I think it's something too, it's like in a more modern context, this is like the hustle culture. This is girl boss culture, which is extremely toxic in my opinion, which is a system that I benefit from, of being blonde, white, female entrepreneur. That's like, those are my people. But I think it can really easily fall into being toxic and being shameful and being comparative in that way, competitive, that I think I'm not a mom myself, so I haven't crossed that bridge yet, unless you count being a dog mom, which is not the same. Sorry, dog people. I definitely have so much respect for parents and striking that balance of being an example, but also giving your kids freedom, but also maintaining your own mental health. There's a lot on the plate for sure.
I will say, I think everyone should have an animal before they have a human.
Yeah.
Just to see how they feel about that.
Just
'Cause
an
if they're
That's the
animal.
struggling with
litmus
that, maybe
test.
they should
Yeah.
wait.
Yeah, start small. Go
Mhm.
goldfish. Like if you
Yeah.
can't keep a goldfish alive, just know you're gonna. It's
They're a
hard.
little fickle.
Like,
They're a little hard. I would go with something a little more with a little bit more ability to handle differing situations, like a cat or a dog.
yeah,
Yeah.
something that requires a time commitment. Like
Yes.
I had 2 cats as a single man.
It changes how you think
the
about
jokes
travel
may be,
and things.
but
like
it does.
Mhm.
Yeah, like I've got to get someone to come feed them. I've got to be home so I can feed them. Like there are all those things that impact your personal life. So
Oh, my mom still reminds me about this with my dog. She goes, he needs to work around your schedule. You don't work around his schedule. He's a dog. So he needs to settle down and go lay down so you can do your work because you're running the show, not him. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. But it took that reminder, you know?
You just mentioned something interesting about the hustle culture, mom boss culture. That some of the toxic part and being honest that you actually benefit from some of that, like your business. How do you think about that? How do you feel about that? And how do you approach how you interface with that culture or that group?
Yes. So I have to quote my middle sister on this one. She's 23.
Are you the oldest?
I'm the oldest. Yeah.
Okay, just to make sure.
My middle sister is very like idealistic, like utopia. This is what the world could be if everybody did XYZ kind of person. And she, I think, really likes the idea of socialism. And me as a diehard capitalist, we tend to butt heads. But she's very anti-Amazon, anti-Jeff Bezos, anti-billionaires, eat the rich, blah, 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 all this stuff, right? And I'm just like, okay, but isn't the best way to give opportunity to employ people? Like hire people that are super talented and like make sure that you're legit and you're honest in your hiring practices and give people opportunity, because equal opportunity does not mean equal outcome, but everyone should have equal opportunity is my belief. But she says I give her crap for ordering on Amazon Prime or having an iPhone, right? I was like, okay, you're going to be on this high horse. Like if you're really going to go, then go like live it, live your farm life. You live your best farm life, girl. And she says, you can be critical of a system and still participate in it. Meaning I can be critical of Jeff Bezos, I can be critical of Apple, I can be critical of social media and still have it like be an active participant in it. I don't need to like denounce it in order to take a stance. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right. So that's how I feel about girl boss culture.
No, I love that. We're recording this in Black History Month. It will not be Black History Month when we release it, but James Baldwin actually has a quote talking about how much he loves America. He loves, and it's because of that love, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's because of that love that he demands the right to be able to criticize it. And it's like, just because we love something, like for instance, I love the 49ers, but sometimes I don't like the play call. Sometimes I don't like the decision made, but it doesn't mean I don't like it. And
it's the same as people who complain about politics but then won't vote. It's like, okay, I hear you and you're entitled to your opinion. Absolutely. But like, in order to have such a strong say, I feel like you really do need to be an active participant. It's the Brene Brown idea of like, unless you're in the arena with me fighting the battles, I don't really need your opinion from the cheap seats either. So either you're going to come down here and fight with me, or I'm not going to weigh your opinion to the same as the people who are here doing the work.
The man in the arena. I think it was Eisenhower. I can't. Yeah, it's a fantastic quote. We'll put it in the notes.
So that opens up an outstanding dialogue of where that line is. So let's take your sister as an example. Many of us, this guy included, have opinions about more than we need to, right? And that energy that we bring into the world to say, Apple, we'll use Apple as an example. Like, I'm going to be critical, I'm going to be negative, but then I'm going to have an iPhone. And most of that criticism and negativity is going to be around probably 2 things. I'm going to produce a whole bunch of products that everybody has to buy all the time. Capitalism, profiteering.
Waste.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
Waste. Then you have, outsourcing, cheap product in China, suicide nets, all that fun stuff. But then my purchase of it promotes that. And I'm actually not doing anything about it by complaining about it. Right. This kind of goes to, I'm not in the arena. I'm simply holding an opinion. So where is that line, right, of at a macro level, not trying to shit on your sister here, right?
No.
Like, and I hope she doesn't take it this way. She's just going to be our avatar
survive.
for this conversation.
survive. Yeah.
You could just switch it to me. I think like that.
Like, where is that line? Like, do we think there is one?
That's, I think, a really good question. I think it's blurry. I think it depends on the issue. I think it depends on your voice in the whole thing. And I think that goes back to kind of some of these rapid fire questions we started with about voice and what is your voice, and when do you use your voice, and how you use your voice, and in what context is really important, because it can't just be about content, it's about context. So yeah, like yelling at me about the waste of creation of iPhones, yes, I'm interested, but am I going to change my exact behavior today? Probably not. But if you had this with a bunch of other people, and there's this social proof around it, and there's this education component, and there was like, I guess I'm more interested in the people that take that passion or that one issue, and then they go and say, I'm going to do something every single day to make sure that this doesn't continue, or that this does continue in this direction. Or if I can change one person's mind about this, then that'll be good. Like, I don't care if it's micro or macro, but to have such strong opinions, but then also not do the action, I think that's what is missing most of the time for me.
Rodney?
I'm thinking, I think I agree with that. I think
we can delete space.
I think I agree with that. And I think it's probably okay to hold the opinions. I think it's what you do with them. Like, if you're just complaining about it all day, then I think that's where the line is for me. Like, because there's a lot of things I don't like. But am I on a soapbox about them all day? No, because I realize I won't get anything done. And I think probably the best way to go about affecting change is to be it, and to try and, like,
yes,
to your point, work on the things that I can affect. And
yes,
I think even some of the groups that I'm a part of, as a member or even as a leader, like, sometimes people get on other people. And I think this is where some groups get toxic, is like when everybody in the group doesn't have the same focus. And my thought, and sometimes back to the group and sometimes I hold to myself because I don't feel like being attacked, is, maybe we're greater as a group because we have different focuses. Foci. We have different foci. And that makes us stronger, because one person can't focus on, if that one person cared about Amazon and global warming and reforestation, like, you can't actually do all of the things. And by the way, eat and work out and work on your mental health and have balance. It seems like it would be good to have a collective to spread those things out. But yeah, so I think I agree with you. What do you think, Keith? Or go ahead, Michelle.
No, go ahead,
I think it's the grace and humility of understanding that not everybody is going to, number one, care, or number two, think the way that you do. So I think that sometimes my gripe with people that are hyper passionate where it dips into the negative complainy is, number one, if they're not actually doing the action that they're saying, and number two, they're not giving the other people the space and humility and opportunity to explain things from their point of view, or to say, like, hey, this isn't important to me and here's why. Like, I think sometimes it gets a little bit soapboxy, and when it does get soapboxy, then you start to dip into, like, okay, if you're not going to do the action, it's performative. And, like, we're talking a lot about performative allyship these days, which I think is rightfully should be called out, because everybody could be doing better on a lot of fronts. And I love having this conversation. But I think too, it's like, it's also becoming like a social faux pas. And there's a lot of situations where I think people miscalculate how they would like to respond. And it just gets, there's so much to unpack there, so much. But I think I'm really inspired by people that take action instead of just talk.
I think it is an energy. I'm big on energy these days. So if I'm going to go into a situation, again, pick on Apple, and I'm going to bitch about an iPhone and Apple, and you come back to me and say, but you have an Apple. And my answer would be, that's not the point. I'm now immediately putting out this conflict-oriented negative energy that's either going to put you on the defensive, check you out, or create some sort of negative space.
And you've contradicted yourself.
And I've
You've become
contradicted
hypocritical
myself.
of your whole message.
And so ultimately now, if you come back to me and say, but you have an iPhone, I say, yeah, that's true. And I don't know, like, and then you create a positive space that can create an ongoing collaborative discussion that may not lead to any action whatsoever. I may end up getting rid of my iPhone as a result, or you may end up getting rid of yours just because of my opinion on it, or nothing might happen. But at the end of the day, there's an acknowledgement, there's an understanding, kind of to your point, Michelle, about grace, humility, and compassion. Like this space that we are all flawed. We all make mistakes. We all hold opinions that are contradictory to our actions. We all are a hypocrite in some form or fashion. So creating judgment of the space around us is that negative energy versus just letting it be what it is and finding ways to make it better if you so choose. But the thing that you don't want to do is make it worse. And that's, I think, where the line is how much worse are you making it by your action, thought, contradictions, or is it neutral to better? And that's I think the space that we could all hold a little bit easier, and it's actually not too hard to do.
Yeah,
it's a lot harder to get Apple to stop manufacturing iPhones in China.
Completely.
Right.
Completely. And we all agree that, like, you know, sitting is the new smoking and screen time is going to ruin all of our brains. And like we know a lot of these things, right? But it's like, how willing are we to change our habits, or are we just going to adapt? Like, I think it's a really interesting conversation. And to bring it back to the girl boss thing, a friend of mine hosted a room on Clubhouse called Ending the Girl Boss Trope. And she was super critical because she says she feels like the light bulb was turned on, and all of a sudden she was exposed to all of the patriarchy and misogyny and horrible things that happen within the girl boss atmosphere, that really it's not nearly as empowering as we make it out to be, and that it's a marketing ploy, and we're like pink business Barbie washing over a huge segment of the population that feels unseen and unheard. And she just went like, whoa, nosedive down. Like, she's like, oh my gosh, I can never use this terminology ever again. And I said, I think it's like, there's so much more context than that. And that's where I brought up, like, we can still be participants of a culture and be critical of them. We can still be beneficiaries of a movement and be critical of it.
An exceptional movie. It's called Dumplin' on Netflix.
Okay.
With Jennifer Aniston.
Yes. Okay. Yes. I haven't seen it, but I know of it.
That embodies this point, and I won't spoil it, but the idea of it is Jennifer Aniston, who is the mom of a teenager, but she runs beauty pageants. And so you can think about the dynamics that play out. It's a great movie. You can watch it. The daughter joins the pageant in protest. And there's a lot of judgment on pageants and all these other things. And her participation ends up, I want to be careful, ends up changing the way you see pageants if they're inclusive, right? If they include different personalities and different, and they do some things in that you look at it and go, if that's the way it is, that's actually kind of cool. Got to make some changes on it. Like, there's some big issues, but they can be a positive force. And it is very much that idea that we don't have to tear it all down because there are some really, really shitty components of it. But if we're not in the ring, going back to the metaphor, we can't change any of it.
Right. And I think there are things, it's really interesting because I love paying attention to trends. I am a pop culture junkie, and I love kind of trying to predict how things are going to go. But this week specifically is kind of, I think, the nail in the coffin for the Bachelor franchise. And I think it's somewhat outdated. Like, I think we're going to look back in 10, 15 years from now and say, remember that show that used to be on TV where 25 people would compete to date the same person? And it was like, because on the basis, it's a horrible concept. It's horrible. And no one is really on that show for the purpose of being on the show anymore. Like, everyone just wants to be Instagram famous. So I think it's just like, and I think the same is going to happen with this girl boss movement. Like, I think the same is going to happen. I've been a part of dozens of female only networking groups, which like is defeating the purpose of inclusivity. Like, hello, like we're going to cut out 50% of the population just because they don't identify as female. Like, what? That to me, and I think also because I'm not a product of like the 80s, 90s, like business professional corporate woman who like had to like experience some of this Me Too stuff. Like, I didn't ever experience that. I don't feel that I'm disadvantaged coming out of college being an entrepreneur as a female. But then again, like, I think there are opportunities where I'm treated differently. But I think that the women's only clubs, like the girls clubs, if there were a men's group that like we're a men's business networking group, I mean, we would be like, burn down the town, here's the pitchforks. Like, hell no. So the double standard there is so striking. And I think it's going to be something we look back on and be like, oh my God, I can't believe that was like the norm.
I think, well, one of the things from what you guys said prior is, nothing is, even something that's great isn't perfect. Like, nothing's all one thing and nothing's all rubbish. Like, maybe we can take spare parts. Out of that last part, I would ask you, well, oh wait, hold on, not ask, comment. I think there are all men groups though.
I think there are, but I don't think that they're out in public.
All male groups. So do you think there is a positive side of the girl boss movement, or the idea, or female groups, all female groups?
Of course. I think females are intensely loyal. I think, like, if we go to the psychology of it too, like, women buy from other women, and when they do, they support them 100%. Like, majority of my clientele is female. But that being said, I don't want to close myself off as a business owner. Additionally, like, I think that there's so much to be gained from a male perspective on all things, just like I would hope that males consider there's a lot to be gained from a female perspective. So I am more of like level the playing field. I don't really feel that we need to, like, particularly in the women in business opportunity, I don't think we need to make reparations, just maybe because I haven't experienced that, and maybe that's my youth showing, but I haven't noticed this huge gap between myself as an entrepreneur at 27 years old versus like a male equal to me. Like, I think we've had a pretty similar come up, which is great, but that's obviously a factor of like the progress that has been made over the history. So it's like this weird thing of like, how much do you acknowledge that like there was wrongdoing versus how much do you say, okay, now like we can pretty much all start from the same starting line, knowing that it will never 100% be equal. Like, I know that as well. I'm not naive enough to think that.
And even like kind of what you're saying, kind of, for me, it brings up this question of responding in kind. And this is something I've thought about a lot as a Black dude. Like, well, yes, there's all white groups, or there's all male groups, or there's all, like, does that mean that's the way I should do it? Like, in order to get back? And to Keith's point about energy, like, is the energy that I'm putting in this, is it negative or positively directed? And wouldn't, I think what Mandela did in South Africa was very much like, okay, like, instead of just like reversing apartheid, let's step to a place where we can all find some grace and humility and like undo things that were done by going to version next. Like, what can this be?
And Cape Town is fascinating. I was there for 6 weeks in like 2019. And I mean, for so many ways, like the fact that apartheid wasn't even that long ago, like we did the Robbins Island tour, everything, but like it's still palpable. Like, you can still feel the separation of the races there. You can see how at a bar of white patrons, the staff is Black, and the way that these local women were treating the staff at this restaurant at the bar, I was like, whoa, like this, I'm not in the US anymore, and I'm in California. So like, I already know that California is still very, very progressive, but you could feel it. Like, you could feel the tension still, which is it's so crazy.
That's in 2019.
Like, that was 2019. Like, and it was in the middle of the water crisis. That brought up a whole bunch of like really interesting race disparity issues as well. Oh my gosh, Cape Town is a fascinating place to be. South Africa in general.
There is
wild.
So much to unpack. So
where do we go?
I'm telling you guys, we're gonna be here all day.
Before we because there was one thing, you jumped into Clubhouse, and I kind of wanted to jump down that rabbit hole, unless you have a question on this, Keith.
Sure.
Oh yeah, I wanna make a comment on this. There are two components to this dynamic that I think are really important to talk about. Because I am 100% okay with women only groups and Black only groups and all these things. I am not okay with men only groups and white only groups because that is the power dynamic. Like,
it's been the norm.
it's just, go to a golf club. There are still men only golf clubs, right?
It stands for gentlemen only, ladies forbidden.
Yeah. And the reality is it's easy for me to find white men only things because that's just it's just the dynamic. Like, that just happens. It's just a natural thing. So to find groups and create groups that represent who you are, as a whatever physical identity that you have, I think is a positive thing. And at the same time, it also depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Is it a social group or is it a business group? Well, if it's a business group, are we able to accomplish our goals by simply having an equal responsive effort, right? Like, just having women in the room, am I going to achieve where we want to achieve? Maybe you are, right? Maybe that's what it is. But I think that level of evaluation does need to happen, and it doesn't need to be so myopic. That being said, there's also this component of exclusion where many underserved communities, women I include in that, don't often necessarily exclude men, whereas in the history of time, men have excluded everybody, right? White men have intentionally excluded everybody. Black people aren't allowed here in particular. And there was a comment a professor said one time. He was talking to Candace Owens on this podcast. It was a wonderful conversation, just because being able to see those two points of view side by side.
She makes my blood boil.
Oh, me too.
Personally.
In so many ways. But he made the point. It's like, yes, I am okay with historically Black colleges, because historically Black colleges don't say white people can't enroll.
Right.
And they do.
Right.
And
they allow white people to enroll, and they do. And in some cases, they over promote to white people, and then it causes issues because they're trying to get on the map or something. And it's a frustration within the ecosystem. Whereas white only places have excluded everyone, right? Excluded white people. So that dynamic is, I think, an important call out to the group.
Fair.
But there is another piece to this. I was thinking about this the other day as it relates to like policing. We think about these things in terms of the historical framework in which all of these things have been developed. We, as individuals in these groups, really, and this goes to your point, Rodney, need to sit back and say, let's radically think about how different it can be. And then let's take the leadership role in changing the dynamic altogether. Like, let's not even think about groups. Like, let's think about it so differently than it has historically been thought about. And that's the only way that changes.
Well, and I would even say, like, let's not use the word radical, because I don't want to scare like old white dudes. I don't want to scare like you don't have to use the word radical.
Policing as an example.
Like, I've been fortunate enough to work with like a couple different teams at SpaceX on some projects, and like the way they approach projects is like super dope, and it's so simple. But it's like, why can't we do this with a lot of things? They look at it at like, they have a new project, and they're like, all right, day one is today, and they don't pull in past data. Like, we've done it like this. They pull in past data to say, like, this is a fact. Like, yes, this is a thing. This is not a thing. But to build the new thing, you can't use the foundation of the old. Just like start. And if there are things that work from it, it's like, cool, let's evaluate that. And then maybe we bring it into what we're working on now. But it is just like, if you were going to build this today from the ground, what would it look like? And it doesn't mean, and I know some people hear that and be like, oh, but you're going to destroy what's there. Not necessarily, because there are good parts that are in whatever system is now. But we could honestly evaluate it versus just saying, well, you want to destroy the police and you want to keep them like they are. And it's like, well, no, I think like there's some, it's not in the middle, but it's somewhere in between those two extremes that
Right.
we probably should go.
Maybe.
And I think the same goes for a lot of things. I think that's how we do affect change in the long term, is like starting over from scratch and wiping the board totally clean. Sometimes you miss on learning those opportunities that present that challenge, right? That challenge you to think differently. And my parents also told us growing up, like, everything is a blessing or a lesson. So it's either a blessing, like it was amazing, that was awesome, this client was a blessing, this opportunity was a blessing, today the weather outside is a blessing, or it's a lesson, right? Or so if you have only those two, it doesn't make it so that anything is happening to you. Like, I don't think any of us particularly have like very strong like victim mentality in my family, because everything is a lesson, right? So a breakup, like you learn something about yourself. You have a client that goes sideways, you learn something about yourself. Like, there's a lot of cool like mental, and you're talking about energy here too, mental positioning of like, okay, this didn't go as planned, what did I learn? And how am I going to apply that moving forward? Because if we just took everything that ever happened to us and when it went bad, just like wiped it clean and forgot about it, then like it didn't serve a purpose for you. You might even make that mistake again. So why wouldn't you kind of take that and embrace it moving forward?
Mindset, humility, and grace. Boom.
Yeah.
We just solved it for everybody. That
Compassion.
have those
Compassion.
things and you'll
Gotta
be
throw
fine.
compassion in there.
A positive mindset.
Rodney, you
be a
wanted to
good-
pivot.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
Michelle.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Finish
You
the thought.
go.
The other theme of growing up for us was be a good person, do a good job. But be a good person first and do a good job second. And hey, just on your shirt, be a good person. Be a good person, do a good job. Like, there's no hacks. There's no like crazy, oh, do this, you crack the code, blah, blah, blah. Be a good person, do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
I heard
Simple.
an advertisement on YouTube the other day. This totally getting cut. It was the hack to make $1 million or something like that, and it's just like,
It's so gross. And in the
That is-
entrepreneurship community too, it's so gross.
yeah,
Ugh.
So
and
let's talk-
it's so enticing. But anyway,
So let's talk about
Rodney,
Clubhouse
like
a little bit.
transition out of this in a way that
Yeah.
makes sense.
I don't know that that's possible, but I'm gonna try. I actually, you know what I want to do, Michelle? You had mentioned Clubhouse earlier, and I want to go back to Clubhouse because I'm fascinated with Clubhouse right now, and I think I figured out what I want to do with it personally, and
Can you
kind of as an
explain
organization
to the audience, since Clubhouse is so new and by invite
Well, I'll let
only?
Michelle.
Yeah.
Do you have a
Sure.
strong understanding of what it is? You want to explain?
Yeah. So Clubhouse is an audio only social networking platform, is kind of how I've heard it described from the organizers. The idea is, or the experience for me and how I describe it to my clients is, it's as if you're showing up to a 24/7 conference where you can jump into any room at any time on any topic and hear what people have to say and also participate in real time. So it kind of blends this like podcasting plus live streaming plus conversational. It's also closing that gap between who we perceive as like celebrity and average Joe. So like Elon Musk is very active on Clubhouse. I mean, I have opinions about him too. And Clubhouse, I think, has tremendous potential, and I think it's the Spider-Man quote, right? With great oh
Power
gosh,
comes
guys, help
great
me here.
responsibility.
Great power comes great responsibility.
Uncle Ben.
There's a ton of power, there's a ton of
Uncle Ben.
influence, there's a ton of opportunity, but there's also, I think, from a business standpoint, there's a lot of responsibility on making sure that you're in the right place with the right people, and you're being a good person and doing a good job, because I think there's a lot of people that aren't, and that's what scares me about Clubhouse. But like I said,
I didn't even anticipate to take this here, but let's talk about the responsibility of organizations like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, now Clubhouse, and privacy, and then also First Amendment rights. Like, so what is your take on that? And then we can go into some other Clubhouse stuff. But what's your take?
This
on
is a delicious topic. I love this topic.
One of my favorites. Thanks for bringing it up, Rodney.
Yeah, because I think that I'm a big fan of like play by the rules of the playground. If you don't like the rules, go play in another playground, which sounds very closed-minded and very maybe like not pro freedom of speech, but also you're using this platform for free. Like, you're using these apps for free. You're having access to this information for free. So I think that we need to consider that as well. I'm very pro side of the business owner, and I'm very pro Twitter on this one of like, yeah, this violates community guidelines. Like their community guidelines are in place for a reason, and it's to protect the community. And I think it's absolutely the responsibility of the social platform to take its community's well-being and put that at the highest regard. So I'm all for that. And I think if you can't play nice, then I'm really sorry, but there's not a space for you here.
It's very different than if if U.S. government had a Twitter site and was silencing brown people.
Absolutely.
Like
absolutely.
or silencing people that they just didn't like that would be one thing. But if it's a organization that has rules, like you sign up for, you show up and
you
actually have to click.
You accept the terms and conditions, whether you read them or not.
And so it's not really a First Amendment topic, but it gets conflated with that, I think, because maybe people don't think about that.
Well, and I think social media brings this like to the nth degree, right? And if you watch the Flat Earth documentary on Netflix, I watched this with my dad, and we were both just sitting there like, huh? Because these people that truly believe the Earth is flat, like it used to be that you'd have like Crazy Steve in your community, right? And like Crazy Steve, would you'd see him at the post office and be like, oh, the Earth is flat. And be like, yeah, Crazy Steve, like, sure, dude. The problem is like Crazy Steve finds Crazy Jan, finds all these other people. And now with social media, you have these whole communities of people that are all collecting around the same idea, which is beautiful, but at the same time, dangerous, I think. And then now you have conferences and conventions, and now all these people are having kids with each other, and they're convinced that the Earth is flat and the moon landing was fake, and conspiracy theories and QAnon. I mean, I just listened to Armchair Expert yesterday, where they had Armchaired and Dangerous about like 9/11 conspiracy theories.
Ooh,
and about the guy who
made
the documentary Loose Change, which kind of like blew the lid off of the 9/11 conspiracy theory, now absolutely regrets doing so. And he's like, I never intended to like make this be a subculture, like make this be a thing. And I was just like an angsty 20-something person that was like, hey, wouldn't it be crazy if? So I think we all have a responsibility as a community to like hear people out, but also know when to draw the line of like, this is bordering on dangerous.
Yeah, it's Rodney, I don't know if there's more that you want to add on your opinion on that. It's a good question.
Probably, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think the First Amendment one is always a fascinating argument that people make when those people who generally are First Amendmenters in the social media are also free market people and don't want government intervention. And at the end of the day, those two conflict in a very material way. Those perspectives, like you talk about the hypocrisy
Back to
that we all
hypocrisies
hold, right?
we talked about earlier.
First Amendment does not apply to private business. If you walk into a store and start yelling "fuck" out loud in front of all the patrons, they can ask you to leave. It's just that simple. Right. So I do think social media carries one responsibility, and that is to manage the distribution of information. Like if QAnon is reaching enough people, it needs to be shut down, right? Because it is socially dangerous. In the same way that if your building catches on fire, you do hold a responsibility to get that put out before it spreads to the next building, right? As much as you want to save your own stuff too. So there is a social responsibility, in my opinion. That being said,
let me ask a question on that part.
Yeah.
And I am in no way a QAnon supporter and or follower, but let's say I were.
Yeah.
I would say that this is true information. Like this is the truth, the fact. So where's the line? And I think it's probably something like each social network should have an ethics committee that decides on its own, like this is okay in our community and this isn't. And then I signing up can decide if I want to sign up. Like they seem to really like QAnon. Is that for me? But like, what do you two think for?
I think you expose the gray area in the land of free market economics, in that I believe if Twitter wants to maintain the moral high ground that another platform can spin up, i.e. Parler, and there is your landing space, and Parler says we're totally cool with QAnon. So people who go to QAnon, or are interested in it or don't care, they can go to Parler and that's their platform. And I know there's that counter argument that says, well, then it's going to spread no matter what. Well, it's going to spread no matter what.
Like, in subreddits, in the dark web, in the whatever.
Slippery slope arguments are just they're slippery slope arguments are just a cop out to actually arguing a point, in my opinion. So when you go to Parler, Amazon shuts you down. It's a free market. They get to choose if they shut you down, whether it's silencing or not, whether you want to call it whatever. That's what it is. Like, this is why I don't understand the similar argument of saying, well, if we're a free market, then outsourcing makes sense. Like, I don't necessarily agree with it, but it makes sense from a profit margin perspective. Employees in America are expensive. So where are we? And I think I'm not entirely a free market capitalist by any means. I do believe government intervention. And I think this is where government steps in and says, listen, guys, you need to control the flow of information. Maybe you reach a point of size. I don't know what that is. I don't know if
what do you think, Michelle?
What's your position?
I think it just comes down to, I'm more about the individual on this, I think. Like, I think that we can absolutely like debate the role of government, the role of these huge companies, the role of media, but I think it really needs to come down to how are we empowering people and educating them to start to make these judgment calls for themselves, and really to treat people the way they want to be treated, and to create a world that they want to see. Like I said before, like, it's about creating equal opportunity, not equal outcome. So again, like, be a good person, do a good job. And if you want to start another social media app that doesn't have these limitations, that's totally behoove you to do that. Absolutely. I'm all for it. You want to have your own news network? You want to start your own political party? Like, yeah, sure. But make sure that it's still operating within these general social constructs of like respect and humility and grace. And I think that's where we lack. And I don't know where on that personal level, like as a society, we've fallen out of touch with treating other people as people, and that there's this hierarchy or this competition, or it's you're stupid and you're this and you're that, and you voted like this, so you must be that way, or you said this, so you're like this putting of people into boxes really easily. I think it's part survival of like, we have to make these quick judgment calls about people because we're getting information thrown at us at like lightning speed. But I even watched
faster than we're capable of.
Yeah. Right. I watched this TikTok yesterday. This guy, I have to pull it up because it's so fascinating, where he was literally making the case for influencers. And he said, like, we have so much information now that we need to look to people that we trust to give us curated information. It's now not even the age of information. It's the age of curated information. And who are you going to trust as a source based on what accreditations, what experience, what value they bring to your life, etc. Because I'm not about to go ask a food blogger person what kind of oil I should put in my car. Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? But knowing who to go to ask the right kind of question to the right person is the new wave of information. It's curated information. So he was kind of
catching up to it. We're catching up to this flow of data, and we're slowly, super slowly, like we're still behind. But your thought on teaching people how to process data and
critical thinking skills.
Like, you can't really make somebody want to do research or want to like look into something. And frankly, I don't do it all the time. And sometimes I just, hey, you know what? Bob said it, I'm in. Like, until the moment it doesn't work, and it's like, you know what, that didn't work. But like,
this happens to me on
type
Clubhouse.
Of a what?
It happened to me on Clubhouse. I really like was jiving well with this woman in a room, and she was great. She's like, oh my gosh, we should host something together. And I was like, yeah, totally. And so we hosted a room together. And then a few days later, I got an Instagram message from someone who follows me, and they say, hey, how well do you really know this person? And I was like, I just hosted a Clubhouse room with them. She's like, she just asked me for money. And was like, I guess, going around and finding everyone that followed me because she's established her credibility aligning with me, and then now is going and
because she sees that you have a successful business, so she's going after people that you.
And I'm like, holy crap, I didn't even think about, because here Clubhouse is supposed to tear down these walls of people who are scammy and shady. And I'm like, oh my God, I did not research this person. I just like took them at face value that they that they were who they said they were. And I'm like, holy crap. Same thing. I had a client come to me who was selling a product that I was like, oh, this is going to be fun, kind of in like the women's health, like a la Gwyneth Paltrow kind of space. And I threw it to my team, and one of my team members wrote me like a 6-paragraph email. She's like, Michelle, she was hit with 3 lawsuits in 2020. Her product is banned in Canada. Like, I, the copywriter, will be taking myself out of this project. And I was like, no, thank you for sending to me, because maybe I'm a natural
Is that the
optimist.
copywriter that was recently on your podcast?
Yeah, Emma.
It's a really good episode. I'm like, I'm a little over halfway
She's
through
super
it
cool.
because I'm trying to learn. You bring up a couple interesting points. I just want to jump in real quick because like one thing I think we have to think about, and we don't have to like solve it here, but like these social media platforms, they are free.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, they're using us as their revenue stream. We are their data, and we're creating their data, and that data is making them money. So there's an aspect there. I think Mr. Wang had an interesting concept about like, how do we monetize ourselves? How do we use our data in the world? Is there an economy for that? And I think there probably is, in Bitcoin and blockchain are working on that. But Clubhouse, they're doing the same thing. They're monetizing our data. I don't know that Clubhouse or any social platform can solve the most basic of social issues. Like what you're mentioning, like basically, I forgot to say, like, you basically nailed our brand. Like everything you just said about not putting people in boxes, loving people for being people. Like I don't have to agree with you. Hell, I don't even have to like you. I don't have to hang out with you, but I can respect you and love you as a person. Like you just like that whole sense. I'm probably gonna pull it out because that was just like
cool.
Our
it can
brand.
Be your sizzle reel. Yeah.
That's our little sizzle for this episode. But like Clubhouse, they're making money, but can they solve the issues of people scamming? Or I mean, because that's happening on the streets out here in LA. Like,
listen, have you ever seen the movie with Johnny Depp when he Sweeney Todd?
Pirates of the Caribbean?
No, Sweeney Todd.
Guys, I'm horrible with movies, but I'm looking
Sweeney
forward to your
Todd,
explanation.
the demon barber of Fleet Street. Yep.
Yeah.
It's a musical. It's a great movie. I love it. There is a snake oil salesman who pees in jars and has a catchy song, and it's to be put in your hair. Like that stuff's been going on forever. We can't solve for these platforms can't solve for the human condition. And I think you said something interesting in there, Michelle, about the individual choice. We've gotten to this place with Facebook, Twitter, that they've gotten so big that we think that is the public square.
Sure.
And you can't create your own public square, but we can. And the premise of solving this is a platform can say, we're open. You have whatever opinion you want. A platform can say, you can't have whatever opinion you want. If you spew hate, if you dox, if you do all of these things, you're out. Get out of here. And I'm going to be open about that. And people join. And I think the biggest solve for all of this is that data point. To your point, Rodney, is if we can say you can no longer monetize my data, or the only way you can monetize data is if there are two options. I pay for this with no advertisement, or I use it for free with advertisement. And if we have both of those options, I think it creates a different market for everything. I think Facebook goes, I don't know what happens to the platforms, especially if they introduce, like you have to pay for these services, whatever they may be.
You'd get a different demographic. I mean, the demographic would undeniably shift.
I can tell you that. So Michelle, I've been on Clubhouse for a few months, since like before. When I got on, there were only about 600,000 people.
Yeah, and you invited me in, which was great.
Yeah, there were like way less people then. And we were having a lot of conversation, and I was late to the game, but like there were a lot of conversations about what happens when this leaves beta and goes to beyond just everybody having 2 invites to having like 8 invites. Like I get invites refilled every day.
Just sign up.
People
like
are selling their invites on eBay. They're selling invites on eBay.
Wow.
It's
people
ridiculous.
will create a market around anything. And one of the things in the conversations was like, okay, there's really 2 ways this is going to go. They're going to sell our data, and it will become what Twitter is. It will become what Facebook is. It will become what is there. Or
being able to
maybe we add, maybe the founders add a membership. And a lot of us were sitting in the rooms and we're like, I'd pay $15 a month. I'd pay $30 a month for what it was, because the rooms that you're talking about, like the entrepreneur rooms and the motivation or the spiritual rooms, like many of them, the majority were legit, and they weren't people scamming. It was people giving like actual value.
Right.
And if you pay, if you make it a pay thing, you weed out some, like you were saying, you weed out some of those other elements. However, from the business owner standpoint, it weeds out some of their revenue potential. So it comes down to what what their goal is as a business.
Yeah, and I think that as a brand, Clubhouse is such an interesting case study. Just because, I mean, there's no visuals. So for me as a visuals person, I'm just like, this is not my space. So I would much rather be on TikTok, Instagram. I love Facebook. I'm one of those millennials that like lives and dies by Facebook. I live for groups. I think groups was the smartest thing they ever did. But I think with Clubhouse, again, I just like, it just gives me this sinking gut feeling that like, oh, this could get really nasty really fast. And I think that you're right. You create a paywall and then you're going to create some exclusivity. And even now with it being invite only, you're creating exclusivity. But correct me if I'm wrong, the whole idea of having to get an invite, and I had to shut people down in my Facebook group because people are like, oh, does anybody have a Clubhouse invite? And I said, I want you guys to think carefully about this. Like, when you get let into Clubhouse, the person who lets you in is now tied to your account. So you don't necessarily want to be invited in by someone you don't know in your personal network. And also, as an individual on Clubhouse, you don't want to invite people in that are not associated with you. It becomes a liability to your brand. And that's kind of how I framed it. I said, we will not be trading Clubhouse invites in this group any longer because you should be there because somebody wants you to be there and feels that you can contribute. So that to me is the social proof aspect.
It was, but not everybody thinks about vouching for others with the same.
And that's a lack of accountability.
And it's a lack of accountability. And so then they'll think about it when it blows back negatively, essentially. Totally. But I love that you stopped that in your group and you said, hey, think about this. And I was talking to people like for a while, they were like, we're not even inviting people we know and talk to every day. We're like, we want a different network. Like, who's the third person that I haven't talked to in a while? I know them. I would still vouch for them, but I haven't talked to them in a while.
Right.
But so I'm curious to hear how you know, you mentioned Clubhouse is a little scary for you right now. I can tell you how I'm thinking about it, but I'm curious how you're thinking about it at this moment.
I think I would like to see some more. I mean, I'm still on it. I'm really loving the small rooms. I think that those are really fruitful. I think you get to talk to people in like a smaller setting and you can have more of an impact because there's just less voices. But I would love to see them implement almost like an Uber rating when you leave the room. Because if you're leaving a room mid-conversation, like we do this on the Peloton bike, like you're done with the workout, it prompts you with that out of 5 stars, how was this ride, right? Because I want to join rooms that have high ratings. And I want to be in rooms where people are getting value from conversation and the speakers are legit and people aren't talking over each other and it's well run and well organized. Like, I want to gravitate towards that, just like I like to gravitate towards 5-star hotels. I'm not really interested in going to the Ramada Inn of Clubhouse rooms. Like, I want to be at the Four Seasons. I want to be at the St. Regis. Like, I want to be with those top tier people and learning from top tier people. And I think the lack of that kind of peer review system in Clubhouse causes me pause. Because followers don't mean anything on Clubhouse. And they don't mean anything anywhere. Like, you can buy followers on anything. So followership to me is not a good metric.
And they actually, and I don't know how they're planning to adapt the algorithm, but it actually dictates your Clubhouse experience, or it did at least. The people you followed and the rooms they were in were the ones that would show up most readily in your lobby. So if you were just following anybody, then you just get
Which anything. I did on accident.
Which I did too. And I've gone back and I've really
curated
I don't know if I actually want to be curated my followers or
there's
my following.
There's totally so many rooms, especially if like you get on late night on Clubhouse. There's some rooms where it was like, there was one on there, it was like, why men love hoes. And I was like, where am I? I was like, this is not anything that I talk about or like am really interested in for business, but it's interesting. And it's also fascinating that there's such diversity of topic. And I think that's what a lot of other social platforms lack, is that diversity of subject matter. So like, I didn't necessarily unfollow, but I also was like, wow, this is definitely out of my usual comfort zone.
It's I think it's a timing thing for Clubhouse. The audio platform is so refreshing.
Yeah.
You get an extra layer of nonverbal cues that you don't get in a tweet or in an IG post. Even in a video that somebody puts, like when you're responding back, they don't get yours. And so I think that has just been really intriguing for a lot of people, and it'll probably get old, but we'll see. We'll see where it goes. I'm thinking about it more for just personal learning and personal because I get into a lot of rooms similar to what you're saying and just have to kind of feel it out. It's like, nah, this isn't the room. I prefer small rooms. If there's 100 people in it, it's not for me. Like,
yeah, same.
I just don't do it.
It's interesting. Well, listen, this conversation.
Are we done? Are we?
So many.
We didn't
more
even talk
things
about
to
branding,
say.
you guys.
Yeah, like what?
Yeah.
I mean, I have time on my calendar. If you want to keep going, I could probably. I don't have anything else going on for like another 45 minutes.
Yeah. Well, it's more of a production thing.
Of course.
And it's a
but I think we
process
should
of
like
cutting.
we got what, 8 minutes? Is that right?
And we've got 2. Based on timestamp. So why don't we do this? Why don't we have a couple of minutes to talk about branding? Rodney, if I'll tee up a question, and then you can ask your last question, and we'll take the last 7 minutes, and we'll use that time. So, Michelle, listen, we got to talk about what you do before we go. This has been super stellar.
We've alluded to it. We just haven't gotten there.
Yeah.
True.
Let's talk about branding for a second.
Sure.
As we come to the end of our conversation, we'll give you just a couple of minutes to promote yourself because this conversation's been so fun. Thank you for indulging the depths and the nuance and the confusing nature that so many people like to easily simplify around these topics and say, this is just what it is. And it's like, yeah, but if you really unpack it all, there's just more that's going to confuse you. So let's have an honest conversation.
Well, and I want to throw a shout out to your TikToks. I love, like, so you create logos, you're creating brand design, aesthetic, Kiss My Aesthetic podcast, which we've talked about. We just haven't set the name up. But I don't create logos. I'm not artistic in any way, shape, or form. But the way you put together a logo and the way you illustrate that through a TikTok is it's actually relaxing. Like sometimes I've had your lives on while I was doing other work. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's how you do that. I could never do it again, but that's pretty sweet. But talk about what you do.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. So I am a nerd for making things work visually. I think that's really what I love. And what I lacked in the art department is, even though you're making art, you're not necessarily thinking about how it functions. You're just kind of making it. And that's where that's where the line stops. I'm much more interested in, yes, of course, the creation process, but then how does that come to fruition? And how does that, outlast that initial concept phase and really kind of become part of a normal dialogue and become part of people's lives? That's really interesting to me. So I'm a big visualization person, as you guys can probably tell. And my favorite thing to do is like that first discovery call with the client and kind of jumping into, oh my gosh, I can see what this looks like in my head based on what you're telling me. Like, I think I just kind of have that creativity. So when I'm showing my work and explaining my work, I like to give context as to why that works for that business. So this logo rocks because this happens. This is commenting on this. This kind of font is giving us this feeling. This color palette is communicating this through color theory. As an art history and fine arts major, I love to kind of pull obscure historical references and kind of find a way to weave that into the branding, which I think gives it kind of like a fresh energy, because I've got at least some schooling in the history of art and how we communicate visually. But the brands that I work with and the brands that I have loved working with since posting everything on TikTok really are brands that for me fall under the category of being brag worthy. And I say brag worthy because I haven't really heard that as a term being thrown around. But what I mean by that is they have a quality to them where someone who buys that product or service can't shut up about it. And they want to tell their friends and they want to tell their family. And there's this natural, organic word of mouth quality to whatever that business does that makes it a really fun fit for me, because I love that potential. And it's also indicates to me that that person sees the value of social media. So before I've said like social media minded brands, but bragworthy is way more fun to say. So that's how I stuck to that one.
Interesting. I'd be curious to find out how to talk about your business that it becomes bragworthy. But
I would say what I understand from listening to you and watching you work a little bit, it's about having clarity around what it is that your business is delivering, and then delivering that at a very intensely focused level.
Mhm.
And Keith and I right now are undergoing some, call it deep brand therapy, to really
Sure.
understand like who our market is, what they are, like all the things you ask, but we're doing that on just like a pen and paper level. And then so we could take that to you to help make that visual and like help that make that real to the eye or from an aesthetic standpoint.
Yeah, and the best design is rooted in research. I'm a big believer of that. Like people will list as their brand inspirations like Apple or Nike. And it's like, yeah, those are great logos, but the logo on its own doesn't mean anything to anyone without context. So it's the combination of all the things that make the brand. It's the combination of the Apple mark on its own. You would think like, oh, it's an Apple like produce. It's like we only know that it's computers and phones
Is
and
the
AirPods
audio
and all
breaking
this
up on
stuff.
your end, Keith?
Not at all.
Uh-oh.
Okay, perfect.
We're
No,
still
it's just,
good?
it got choppy on my end, but you're good. So sorry, keep
Yeah.
going. I
No
just wanted to make
problem.
sure, 'cause this is good.
Yeah, I think we associate these logo marks that are so classic in our like cultural awareness of them with the product, but that's because of years and years and years of branding. Like I had a client say that one of her brand inspirations was Louis Vuitton. It's like, okay, so if we're going to be talking about Louis Vuitton, what I'm hearing then is you're interested in repeating motifs, patterns, and a focused color palette. And I know that because every time someone's listed Louis Vuitton, that's been what they admire about them, is that they have 3 signature patterns and they're on every piece of merchandise and every piece of clothing that they ever make. And they like the recognizability of Louis Vuitton for those things. So if that's the case, how do we then implement that in their brand and give them a bespoke pattern or set of graphics so that they can communicate that to their audience as well?
That's
dope.
There's so much to
We
talk
need
about
you.
branding, you guys.
We
I could
need
talk
you.
about it forever.
We need
So
you.
the thing is, we will be hitting you up once we can
Perfect.
actually, because what I realized after stumbling and fumbling at it for a long time is like I would sit down with you and I wouldn't be able to answer your questions, and that won't get to a bragworthy brand. It'll get to just like
Right.
Well, you
us
can
all
download
staring
my
at it.
brand questionnaire. That would be the first spot. So
Where we
MKW
find that?
Creative, mkwcreative.co/brandq. You can download the questionnaire that I use with all my clients, and it's like 6 pages of questions. But really what I'm getting into in that first discovery strategy call with clients is I know what my follow-up questions are. So they will write out their answer, and I've got my own list of questions that are follow-ups to those questions. And
So-
sometimes it's as simple as like listing out, if I ask you what are your 3 brand adjectives, then my follow-up to that is like, what are the opposite of those qualities? Like, what do we not want to be, right? So how can we look to the positive and to the negative? How can we find the space of within your competitors on a whole spectrum of where you could stand out versus where you need to kind of fall in line because you find the same audience together? So there's a lot of these kind of positioning, market research kind of questions that I think prime us for a really great, really intentional brand design that's not just pretty, but functional.
I have an idea because we didn't get to go deep in this, and like you just lit up, and so
Yeah.
I would love to go deep on it. So one of the things that I think we could do, we'd already talked about kind of doing some co-branding, like leading up to your episode. It might be kind of interesting. So we'll put the link for the brand guide and question and your website in the show notes.
Great.
But we could do like a couple of lives. Like it'd be interesting to kind of do a live with me and a live with Keith, and like you ask us our brand questions and see if we're aligned or if we're not. Almost like one of those how well do you know your
Dating
business
games?
partner kind of
Like,
game
Totally.
shows.
Totally.
But just like to throw it out there, I think it'd be interesting. It'd be really enlightening for us, but I think it'd be cool to introduce you to our audience. And
that
I
sounds
think that would be a
great.
cool idea.
I'm super down for that.
Let's we have to ask the last question.
We do, even though I feel like you've already given what would be a couple of amazing answers for it, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. We always end with, what do you want to leave this audience with?
Ooh. I think be a good person, do a good job is the theme for me. Because that pretty much covers all your bases. And by be a good person being the first part of that sentence, the do a good job is the secondary portion. So to me, it's not as important as being a good person, but being a good person looks like doing what's right, sticking up for the underdog, being humble, being willing to learn, being willing to admit when you're wrong, constantly kind of like evolving, constantly kind of looking to improve yourself and improve the world around you. That to me is being a good person. And then doing a good job is following up on what you say you're going to do, being honest, being transparent, and being productive. I think productivity is part of that too, of doing a good job, is giving it your 110% effort. So I think that's the one I choose. It was hard to pick.